What story do you really want to tell but no one has asked the right question for you to bring it up? Warning, some audiences may find this content disturbing. View at your own discretion. Welcome to the House of Reddit. Today, we share some r/askreddit posts from Reddit. What story do you really want to tell but no one has asked the right question for you to bring it up? My dad was friends with a crow that lived at his workplace for a few years while we lived in Bosnia, and one day Po, as my dad named him, came up to him and started showing my dad that he couldn't fly properly, like really exaggerating how he couldn't fly. So my dad picked him up and put him in an open box and took him home to me and my mom. Po lived with us for a few days and acted like he's been with people his whole life, even though he was clearly a wild crow. He ate from our hands and would hang out with us on the patio, and he even let me hold him, which was surprising, given I was about 3 at the time. Bosnia doesn't have a lot of air conditioning, so we always had the sliding door to the patio open, so it's not like Po was trapped. After maybe 3 days he decided he was feeling better and flew off after catching our attention to let us know he was going. My dad never saw him again since we lived around 10 miles away from where my dad worked, and I guess he never made it back. Still, was a very cool experience to have a pet crow for a few days. When I was a kid, we used to play football and such in an empty lot next to one other kid's house. When dinner time rolled around, his mom would stand on the porch and yell Eric. Eric. But Eric was one of those kids who took like 10 name yells to come home. So the mom would be out there yelling a long time. Now at that same time, there was this crow who lived on or at least hung out on that family's garage. The mom liked the crow, so she would leave out food for it, sunflower seeds and such, and suet in the winter, etc. So the crow naturally took a shining to her. Sometimes it would even fly down onto the fence when she was outside putting clothes on the line or cleaning up the yard. Eventually, the crow decided the Eric was a mating call for humans or something, and he decided to join in. So every time the mom stood outside yelling for her kid, it would be Eric. From the mom and then Eric. From the crow, and back and forth until Eric reluctantly came home from the empty lot. One summer when we were around 11 or 12, Eric got hold of a pack of big-ass firecrackers. The M83 kind that everyone says is the same as a quarter stick of dynamite. I used to think that was a false claim, but I learned real quick I was wrong. We were all out in the empty lot, and Eric lit one off and bam. Fast fuse. Eric had been holding the M83 in his fist, and it blew his hand open, blasted his thumb off at the pad, and shot a bone shard into his right eye. Being good friends, we did the right thing, i.e. we left him screaming on the ground and bleeding and then booked it straight home like lions were chasing us. And before you think we were assholes, someone did ask the obligatory "you okay?" so the formalities were observed. Somehow, Eric made it home on his own and got taken to the hospital. He lost his right eye and most of his right hand. At some point the family moved away. All of us other kids' parents use this as an object lesson: play with firecrackers, and you'll go blind, lose your right hand, and have to move to another state and never see any of your friends again. Basically the same as if you masturbate, if you think about it. Where the crow comes back into this story is that he stuck around, spending his days hopping back and forth on that garage rooftop. And every night around 5 p.m., he would be up there yelling Eric. Eric. At the top of his little lungs. His timing was so regular that many of our families actually used it as their means of getting kids to come home for dinner. Moms would say make sure you leave as soon as you hear the crow yell Eric. Or you're going to have cold meatloaf. It was still up there when I left for college, and even decades later, long after it had died or flown off, people in that neighborhood still told the story about the crow who yelled the name of that kid who blew his hand off with an M83. My great-grandfather lived in Kansas when the Dust Bowl hit the U.S. He and his wife lived in a really small town and he owned the grocery store. After he passed away, my family was going through the stuff in his house and found a box of letters he had hidden from everyone. Every letter was a thank you from different families he helped during the Dust Bowl. People would be running from the Dust Bowl and pass through his town. He would give them free food to last them until they reached their destinations. Many of the letters thanked him for saving their lives and stuff like that. He took this secret to the grave, literally. Not even his wife knew. I've heard mention that maybe she wouldn't have been quite as pleased, but I don't know about that. I just think that's super cool and I'm very proud of him. I have a lot of weird stories about my family that I never get to tell, haha. I've dated 2 separate people I met in the mental hospital. I realize why it's not an advisable idea, but those were both by far my healthiest and happiest relationships. When you're in a mental hospital you really have no choice but to be vulnerable and open with someone. After all, they already know something you'll probably try and keep secret the rest of your life. I dated Chris for 4 months when we were 16 until he eventually committed suicide, and I dated Bella for a little under a year when I was 20, she was 19, until a long-distance relationship became too hard for us to keep up. I don't recommend you spend your time in a hospital scouring the ward for potential hookups, but if you do find someone, that will be the person that understands what you're going through more than anyone else in your life outside, and that's a connection that's hard to break. When I was around 19, some friends and I took some ecstasy and went to the beach at night. When we got there, we were surprised to find that it was during a Grunion run. There wasn't that many, so the beach was still navigable, which was pretty awesome. We also had the whole beach basically to ourselves. At one point I walked back to the car to grab some cigarettes, and on my way back I came across a man sitting on some rocks by the beach playing a saxophone. I approached him and asked if I could sit and listen for a while. He was really polite, a little shy, and had a South American accent. Anyway, I sat there for like 10 minutes listening to him play, and it was absolutely magical. My friends eventually came looking for me since I'd been away for a bit, and the extra crowd, and likely the fact that we were visibly on drugs, made him nervous, so he stopped. We said our goodbyes and moved back to our area to give him privacy. I'll never forget how great it was while it lasted. The combination of the sounds of the ocean, breeze along with the saxophone, just sitting there watching the waves roll in with this stranger. It was a truly unique experience. Of course the drugs helped. The next morning my father had a stroke that led to a slew of medical problems and his eventual death 5 years later. I'm sorry for including this, but the memory is intrinsically linked to my father in my mind, so it feels wrong not to include it. When me and my slightly older cousins were kids, they'd try to convince me of falsehoods all the time. I was, and still kind of am, extremely gullible. I fell for "Hey, gullible is on the ceiling" more than once. One day when I was around 11, the elder of my cousins was talking about how he was joining a lacrosse team. I had no idea what that was, so I asked him. He explained the rules and the tools of the game. I was certain that he was lying to me, that it was another prank. There was no fucking way people ran around with small baskets on sticks, throwing and catching hard balls. That's insanity. So I smirked, said sure, and went on my way. For the next several years, whenever someone mentioned lacrosse, I'd snicker, thinking I was privy to a joke. When I was around 17, a friend of mine mentioned that she was going to a lacrosse game. I laughed and said, kind of annoyed, "Yeah, I know the joke, you can drop it. Lacrosse isn't real." She was so confused and looked at me like I was crazy. She insisted it was in fact real, I insisted it wasn't. We looked it up online, sure enough, completely real. I was utterly shocked, and way more than a little embarrassed, especially when I thought back to all of my weird responses to mentions of lacrosse. Very vaguely related, but reminded me of when I didn't believe in Christians as a child. My parents were totally indifferent to religion and literally never talked about it when I was growing up, and also never tried to make me believe in Santa. The first time I heard about Santa, I brought it up with my sister, 7 years older, and she laughed at me and said that Santa wasn't real and it was just something adults pretend is real so that children behave. When I was 6, I started at a Christian school, just because it was the closest, and we had a morning assembly every day where the head teacher talked about God and Jesus, and how if you are a good person you go to heaven, and I thought, never heard of these lads before. Guess they are to keep kids in line like Santa, but they can use all year around rather than just around Christmas, and never brought it up with my parents/sister from fear of being laughed at. It wasn't until I was about 9 or 10 that I realized that there were actually adults that were genuinely Christians, and it wasn't just a massive, elaborate inside joke at the expense of children. My story wouldn't have been awkward if my mom could keep her mouth shut and my dad wasn't a weirdo. She had given me the talk and some pads to keep in my backpack, so when I got my period at school, I was prepared. I got home from school and told her, and I asked her not to tell anyone because I was a bit embarrassed, pretty normal for a 12-year-old. If the story stopped there, it's completely uneventful. But my mom called my dad at work and told him. So then he took it upon himself to stop on his way home and purchase chocolates, flowers, and a goddamn congratulations balloon. Then he gets home and hugs me and tells me he's so proud that his daughter is a woman now. Cringe. It was the most embarrassing moment of my life. The worst part was that my younger brothers were there and started asking a bunch of questions about why Dad got me flowers and what we were celebrating. I ended up locking myself in my room for the rest of the night and crying. In hindsight, it's pretty hilarious, and I know my dad was genuinely doing his best to try to make me feel better, but at the time, it was literally the worst moment of my life. I didn't want my dad or brothers to even know I had my period, not to mention have a family party to celebrate it. I have never, ever told this to anyone before. Ever. I knew all the body parts and what they produced, thank you, Encyclopedia Britannica illustrations, from a very young age. I just could not figure out how sperm got from the penis to the fallopian tubes to get to the egg. Then I saw a scene of a movie where a man and woman were doing a bit of clothed bump and grind. My little brain, not knowing what foreplay was, much less anything else, leapt to a conclusion. I decided sperm must crawl out of the penis and up through the man's clothing to his stomach area. Then when his belly brushed against a lady's belly, the sperm would jump onto her clothes, super sperm, crawl down, into her underwear and up through the vagina to eventually find the egg. My poor parents had no idea why I would freak out if boys brushed up against me for a couple of years. I knew I wasn't supposed to look at those pictures, so I was afraid to admit to them I was just trying to prevent unwanted preteen pregnancy. If you enjoy this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please let us know in the comments below. Turn on the notifications to know when we post new videos. Thank you for coming to the House of Reddit.